G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for what I expect will be one of the less watched videos this year. But today I think it's really worth discussing some major positives within a really bad loss, who played well for us, which is a fairly small list. More importantly though, who looked really promising for us. And then the key takeaways from today's loss, including some really important or just interesting tactics. First though, before we get going, I'd like to humbly request that anybody enjoying these videos who's not already a subscriber to please hit that subscribe button. As I've mentioned before, the minimum number of subscribers to monetize this channel on YouTube is 1,000. So until we hit that number, I'm just going to try and keep these requests at the start of my videos to hopefully help get there. But now, to the good news I promised that I'm sure anybody who's watching probably needs to hear. And there's two big positives. One is the fixture, and two is what we saw from the youth who played today. So for me, at least, the way I see the fixture, I actually think that today we got over the worst of it. I'll just say, because when I first looked at the fixtures before the season started, I distinctly remember thinking that we weren't really going to catch a break until Gather Round, which is next week. I did keep a little bit of hope there for a derby upset, just because those games do tend to be a bit more of a wild card. Even when West Coast was on top, you never really could rely on form when the two teams from Western Australia come up against each other. But beyond that, it just felt like, considering where West Coast is at, the opening 4 rounds could bury the confidence of this young side before they even got a chance to get going. And while there have been some bad losses, I don't think that this is fully what's happened up until this point. Mainly because we performed well above expectations against Brisbane. And you just hope that coming off a performance like today's against GWS, that the message to the squad would just be to stay focused, because the next phase of our fixture is about to begin, which is the phase where I think we should be going into games with every intention of causing an upset. And I want to be a little bit careful of the messaging in that statement, since I'm sure there's a lot of fans who would say that we should be going into every game with the intention of causing an upset. And I'd imagine that as a coach, that's also what would be said week in, week out. But yeah, going into this round in particular, round 4 against GWS, I can genuinely say I just held out absolutely no hope of it happening today. I just remember looking at the matchups across the entire field, and it barely looked like there were more than 1 or 2 matchups where our players looked like they could potentially win the battle against the individual they're on, which isn't everything when it comes to team games, but when it's across the ground as dominantly as GWS have structured their list, there's very little that you can hope. There's very few avenues to victory from that point. So it's kind of why I was quite keen to actually watch the waffle yesterday, and I did have every intention of putting out a review video. But I don't know if anyone else figured it out, but it was the only game on 7 Plus that had technical difficulties and never seemed to end up streaming. As always, thanks for nothing, Channel 7. There's literally nothing good about 7 West Media, and that just continues that. But anyway, it's worth getting into the best players now, even though there weren't a heap. And at the top of that list was once again our number 1 recruit, Liam Baker. Baker led the side in the contest. And as always, he played the role of getting first hands of the ball in a match where we were really dominated in that space again. Even worse against GWS, the class of a side like that, once they do have first hands opportunity in the contest, they really make the most of it and they'll spread the ball fast. So I do wonder, with a game like today's, what it might have looked like if we didn't just have that single guy like Baker winning as much as he did individually out there consistently, just because there was a notorious game against Sydney that I wish I could forget a few years ago that springs to mind when you picture what it might have looked like without Baker doing what he did. So he was definitely my best for the day. Another guy in the best for me was Archer Reed. Not quite in the stats, but being a key forward and a belting is one of the toughest jobs in footy. And I don't mean as in hard work tough, but just it's very difficult to leave any mark on a footy game when that's your role during the big losses, to wait at the other end of the ground just to take any opportunity that comes. That said, Reed did impose himself at every opportunity, I thought. What stood out for me today is he looks really difficult for defenders if you get caught out in a one-on-one against him, I think it's 203 centimeters tall. He just uses that height and just the overall size he's got, which probably includes a lot of strength or just weight is maybe the word that you'd use, to make really easy work of his direct opponents. And he just uses that really cleverly to his advantage, which we heard all pre-season from everyone who was playing alongside him, that he's a really smart footballer, and that's really starting to show. The next one, as the game wore on, the other Reed, Harley, started to really impose himself on the contest. He's not exactly Mr. Consistent right now, just because he's looked very low energy at the start of the game the last couple of weeks. But then as time goes on, he does just more and more start to just increase his output until he forced his way into our best players on the back of a massive second half. So it's really good to see him gaining a bit more confidence in his trademark run and carry. And hopefully he turns it on next week against Carlton in gather round for a full 4 quarters, because for his second half, he was the best player in our team. So that would be a very damaging impact if you could do that across 4 quarters. The last special mention that I have to include in the best is Brady Hoff. It's funny saying this about a 22-year-old, because I know anyone who follows the channel probably knows that I like to refer to the real senior established players as a known quantity. Which means that we already know how good he is. So I try not to linger talking too much about these guys. But it's just crazy that Hoff, to me, is in that category because he's 22 years old. But that said, he's rock solid for us week in, week out. And today he definitely deserved to be mentioned in the bests. Outside of them, some of the more promising performances I thought included Sandy Brock. Now, ignoring the fact that Jesse Hogan kicked 9 goals, not all of them were on Brock. But for a kid that was signed up at the last minute from the SSP period over the preseason, after being delisted by Gold Coast, I can't imagine that he's going to be giving his spot up in the squad easily, potentially to Harry Edwards, although it just depends on what we're up against as to whether we have more key backs in another side. But based on what I saw against a really dominant inside 50 count between us and GWS, and then obviously one of the stars of the competition when he was on Hogan, he looked like he held his own whenever he was given the chance to do so. And he's got a really cool head under pressure. So I thought that was a really promising performance from Sandy Brock, controversial as that might sound. And the next one would be Tom Gross. How good is Tom Gross? I really hope he remains in the squad next week and gets a chance to take what he did, a bit like Reed, in that second half and turn it into a big 4-quarter performance. Because my read on Gross is that he's a very good chance to become the ball accumulator that we've been desperate for a few years now. I mean, really, we've just lent on Tim Kelly to really be the guy that constantly puts up big numbers, big stats, even if it doesn't mean that he's just that penetrating, line-breaking player. And you do need them in this squad. So Tom Gross has that written all over him. I remember watching him through the preseason, thinking that he had a lot of Riley Sanders, Cam McKenzie about him as a junior, but he was picked up, I think, something like pick 43. So that's a steal. And I just think every game that he gets from here, he's going to get better, just as long as he keeps getting selected. So I really hope that's the case. Other than these two, I'm going to say that both Clay Hall and Tyrell Juar were the other promising players, really pushing their way towards being in our best, which I take a lot of pleasure in saying, because we really need our younger players to start driving the improvement this year. Especially since it would appear that we've really hit that line in the sand moment where it's time to play the young guys no matter what, and that's what we did. I actually thought Clay Hall really got us going during a really brief little fight back towards the end of the second quarter, which is probably when we needed it most. He had a quiet start in the first, just getting a feel for where he could get his hands on the footy. That's what happens when you take guys in and out of the side. But once he did get going, he showed that he really has the ability to generate some drive forwards. Same goes for Juar. Like Hall, he was towards the upper end of our possession getters. And like Hall, his possessions did drive a lot of the ball forwards, even though he does it in a completely different way. You've got an outside wingman and an inside mid. But they both do achieve a really good outcome when it comes to actually getting those chain plays up the ground. And I think that pretty much covers our best and promising players. And like I said at the start of this video, I actually took a lot of enjoyment out of seeing the performances that I did from our youngsters, rather than just worrying too much about the scoreboard, which admittedly was a pretty ugly scoreboard. But if you do focus on, I think, what we were talking about hoping to get out of this weekend, I was talking about in the Western Dirty review, then you probably could say that we got everything that you could possibly ask for, other than a slightly closer scoreline, which takes us to the key takeaways from the match. I've got 2 key takeaways from this match, and I'm also pretty keen to talk about these because the first one, which was tactics, is a really positive one as well. So for all the subscribers to this channel who watched my Western Derby review, you might remember a bit of a bold call. I think I called myself a bit of an armchair expert at the time, that I made to turn around our midfield issues. What I said was that we needed to bring some youth into the midfield, but at the same time, we couldn't afford to drop any of our senior mids while we're at it. And the reason for this was that we can't afford to put the weight of that battle on our senior mids because they're just getting tagged out of the game. I think what I was saying was that the lack of comprehensive class across that midfield means that you can really focus on 1 or 2 guys that are dangerous, which means that putting the senior guys is almost a liability, especially if they're attacking mids. But we also couldn't afford to drop them because that just puts way too much weight on young guys, especially against the midfield like GWS, but that'll be every side going forward this year. So it was basically a call for us to give more centre bounce time to the youngsters and keep the experience in the squad as well. And I was really stoked to see that that's exactly what we did at selection. So McWalter brought in 3 mids. Obviously, Davis was the sub, but we only had 1 mid come out of the side, which was Elijah Hewitt, just with that calf complaint. Hopefully, complaint is the right word and it's not a serious injury. So after a solid preseason, unfortunately, that move did gut our midfield in the waffle. But what it did for the AFL side was it helped our midfield run out the full 4 quarters against one of the fittest sides in the competition. And it also provided invaluable exposure for guys like Gross and Hall, who are absolutely up to the AFL level. And hopefully we see a lot more footy from both of those guys at the top level. So that's the really exciting key takeaway that I was looking forward to discussing. The other one was it's really just about acknowledging where we're at and who we've been up against recently. GWS are an absolute class outfit, and looking at all the matchups across the field, like I said, going into this weekend, it's a very difficult game to see us being competitive, which I think we were. And you could probably say the same about all 4 squads that we've come up against to start our season, which is why I was saying that it's something that we hopefully have just really broken through a block of very difficult matchups to start the season. There's no denying that Carlton will go into next week the better side and a strong favourite, but they're not in my list of unbeatables, which I'd argue Gold Coast, Brisbane and GWS all are, while Fremantle's list is years ahead of us just in sheer weight of top-end draft picks. So if nothing else, I'm looking forward to us finally playing a club that isn't a fellow non-Victorian. So hopefully I'll see you guys all again for that next week. And until then,